The courtroom was filled with a tense silence, the kind where every breath felt heavy and every glance carried judgment. All eyes were locked on a decorated black Navy SEAL, a man who had risked his life countless times for his country. He stood calm, steady, with the same discipline that had carried him through battlefields. But across from him, a police officer carried himself with hostility that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with prejudice. Words turned sharp, and in an instant, the officer crossed a line no one expected inside a court of law. The clash was not just about authority, it was about dignity, respect, and the hidden biases that surface when truth is too heavy to silence. The crowd inside the courtroom shifted uneasily, some whispering, others pulling out their phones, sensing history unfolding before their eyes. The Navy SEAL's silence spoke louder than any defense, but the officer's aggression escalated, pushing the tension to its breaking point. That was when the sound of boots echoed through the hallways. Military police, dressed in full uniform, stormed into the building with a precision that left the air charged. No one knew if they had come as protectors or enforcers. In that frozen moment, every heart waited to see what would happen next. The room seemed to shrink as the military police entered, their steps firm and unshaken. People in the gallery leaned forward, trying to make sense of why they had come with such urgency. The Navy SEAL stood tall, his face calm but his eyes carrying years of discipline and battles no one in that courtroom could ever understand. He was not just a soldier, he was a man who had earned respect on missions that most would never hear about, serving a flag that now seemed to waver under the weight of injustice. Inside its own courts, the officer who had confronted him shifted, uneasily, his earlier bravado cracking under the sight of uniformed authority. Walking in, whispers grew louder among the crowd. Some wondered if the military police were there for the officer, others feared they had come to silence the Navy SEAL himself. The judge's gavel struck, but even that sound felt weak against the tension that filled the air. Every second felt longer than the last. The SEAL's service record, his medals, his sacrifices, all of it now hung in a fragile balance against an accusation that reeked of bias. The truth was hidden, and the next move from the military police would decide whether justice would stand or crumble before everyone's eyes. The military police formed a line near the entrance, their presence alone enough to shift the energy of the courtroom. Everyone could sense that something bigger was at play, something deeper than a heated exchange between a cop and a soldier. The Navy SEAL's attorney quietly leaned toward him, whispering about the risks of staying silent, but the jaw remained tight. He had seen worse storms in combat, yet this battle was unlike any he had faced. This one was about truth, dignity, and a system stacked against him. The officer, still standing across the room, tried to mask his unease with authority, but his voice shook as he insisted on his version of events. For some in the gallery, his words were convincing. For others, they revealed cracks in a story that didn't quite add up. A few veterans in the crowd exchanged knowing looks, recognizing the discipline in the CL's composure. To them, his silence was not weakness, but strength. Meanwhile, behind the bench, the judge studied the military police with an expression that gave away nothing. Were they summoned to control the courtroom, or had they arrived under orders tied to something larger, something hidden from the public eye? The uncertainty lingered heavy, and the unanswered question hung in the air. Who exactly was the real target that day? The air grew heavier with every passing second, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The Navy SEAL finally lifted his gaze toward the officer, his steady eyes cutting through the noise and whispers. He hadn't spoken a word, yet his silence was louder than any argument. Across the room, the officer's stance faltered, his voice rising, more defensive. Now, as if he knew the truth was slipping away from him, every sentence he uttered seemed to dig him deeper, but still he pressed on, desperate to hold control. The military police had not moved since entering, but their presence loomed large. Their hands rested at their sides, their focus trained on both men, leaving the entire courtroom guessing. Were they about to arrest the officer for his outburst? Or was the CAL himself the one under investigation? That uncertainty kept everyone's pulse quick. Even the judge's attempts to restore order were drowned out by the tension in the room. People leaned forward in their seats, some clutching their phones tightly, recording every second. The SEAL's reputation, the officer's authority, and the court's credibility all hung in the balance, each one fragile and exposed. Then, as the officer took one final step forward, the military police shifted, boots striking the floor in unison. The moment everyone feared and waited for had arrived. The sound of the military police moving in unison froze the entire courtroom. For a moment, everyone thought they were about to restrain the officer, but then their formation split, and half the unit turned their eyes toward the Navy SEAL. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The shift created a wave of confusion. Why would the very force sworn to protect military honor now focus on the man who had carried it with pride across countless missions? The officer's face lit with a flicker of triumph, but it was short-lived. One of the military police officers stepped forward, pulling out a sealed folder, its cover stamped with markings that made the judge lean forward with unease. The CL recognized it instantly. Classified documents, the kind that never surfaced in a civilian courtroom. The crowd erupted in whispers, theories colliding about hidden orders, suppressed evidence, and truths buried far deeper than a simple courtroom dispute. The SEAL's silence broke only in his steady breath, but his mind raced. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. Someone wanted a story buried, and he was standing at the center of it. The officer's smirk, the judge's unease, and the military police's secrecy all tied into a larger battle. No one in that room was prepared for end. The next move would change everything. The lead officer from the military police stepped forward, opening the folder in full view of the judge. Inside were documents that exposed not the Navy SEAL, but the officer who had confronted him. Hidden complaints, falsified reports, and a long trail of misconduct came spilling out like a storm finally breaking. The courtroom erupted, voices rising, the officer shouting in protest, his words now powerless against the weight of the evidence. For the first time, the SEAL spoke, his voice calm but firm, reminding everyone that honor was not just a word, but a duty one he had lived by even when others tried to strip it away. The judge, shaken, ordered silence as the military police surrounded the officer. The smirk that once carried arrogance had turned into panic. It was clear he had underestimated not only the Navy SEAL, but the system that now turned its gaze back on him. The crowd watched in awe as the truth, long buried, finally cut through the noise. But just when relief began to settle, the twist came. The lead military police officer, after cuffing the disgraced cop, turned back to the SEAL. His voice was steady as he revealed another order. The SEAL himself was to be escorted out, not as a criminal, but as a witness to something even larger, case that reached far beyond this courtroom. The battle, it seemed, was only just beginning. The room slowly settled after the storm of revelations. The officer was let out in cuffs, his once commanding voice now drowned in silence. The Navy SEAL stood quietly as the military police approached him, but instead of hostility, their gestures carried respect. They explained that his testimony was needed for a larger investigation, one that would uncover corruption reaching well beyond that courtroom. For the first time, the SEAL allowed himself a small nod. He had faced battles overseas, but now he understood his service was not finished. It had simply shifted to a different kind of war, one fought with truth instead of weapons. The judge, visibly shaken, dismissed the court. People filed out slowly, many still whispering about the shocking turn of events. Some offered the SEAL words of gratitude, others only looks of quiet admiration. He remained composed, carrying the same discipline that had defined his years in uniform. The difference now was that his fight had become a symbol for many watching. As the SEAL walked out alongside the military police, he knew the road ahead would not be easy. Yet his story reminded everyone present of one simple truth: courage is not only shown on battlefields abroad, but also in standing firm when justice is tested at home. And in that moment, the nation was watching.